Welcome to Infopointe, Alphapointe's online learning platform. For the past over 100 years, Alphapointe has been a national leader in the rehabilitation and employment of those with vision loss. Today's webinar is Expanded Core at Home, Orientation and Mobility. This is the last in our Expanded Core at Home series. As we get started, I'm Jessica Traster. I'm the Rehabilitation Services Manager, and joining me today is Jake McLaughlin, our Manager of Youth Services.
Hey guys, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Jake. So before we get started, we do have a little bit of housekeeping to do. First one, this presentation is designed with accessibility in mind. This means that we will be describing all of the slides that are on here for those with total vision loss. For those with low vision, we have used a black background with large yellow text. So you may have to use, if you're using color inversion software, you may have to turn it off. For zoom text, that key command is caps lock C. Across either the top or bottom of your screen, depending on your setup, is a control bar. You have the ability to raise your hand. You can put something in the chat box, for example, if you want to share a resource. And then we will have a question and answer portion at the very end of the webinar. So as we're going, if you have a question, you can put it in that question and answer box. Now, this particular feature does hide itself on some computers if you're not actively moving your mouse or touching your screen, so it may disappear during the webinar. All you have to do to bring it back up is to either shake your mouse or touch your screen if you're using a touchscreen device. Our objectives for our webinar today, we want to list the 9 areas of the expanded core curriculum. We want to explain the importance of orientation and mobility and discuss strategies that you can use at home to support orientation and mobility learning. So for this one, we have to do a very big disclaimer. Orientation and mobility is a very safety sensitive subject. We are not orientation and mobility specialists, although we did maybe sleep in a Holiday Inn Express last night. I don't know about you, Jake, but I think I did.
Sometimes, yeah.
We do have orientation and mobility specialists on staff, but again, nobody's going to know your child as well as their orientation and mobility specialist that they work with through the school system. So always defer to your child's O&M specialist as to what skills they are able to use independently. So with that disclaimer there, we're going to go ahead and provide a little bit of background regarding the expanded core curriculum. So 80% of learning is visual. That's how our brains are hardwired from birth, and that is how our society and our schools are set up. So when you take away what we call that primary sensory channel, we do have to be more strategic in how we teach our students. It aids in concept development. So if you've been on these webinars, these examples are going to be very familiar. I'm starting to run out of my concept examples, but a concept is sort of an overarching idea. So since we're on orientation mobility, I'll use my favorite one, the concept of a vehicle. Our children who are sighted can look out that car window as you're driving down the highway and they can see a semi-truck, a bus, a pickup truck, an SUV, a small car. They can see that those are all vehicles on wheels. They all travel from one point to another. They transport people or goods, but there's things that are different about all of them. So under that concept of a vehicle, they then have understanding of the different types of vehicles without having to have a lot of explanation. Our kids with vision loss have a harder time being able to observe that, and so we have to be much more strategic in how we teach that concept, and that's where that expanded core curriculum comes in. And it helps make education accessible. So a big part of the expanded core is giving students the skills they need to sit with their regular sight in that regular classroom with their sighted peers to be able to access print, to learn. And when we're talking about orientation and mobility, to get to the classroom in the first place so that they can learn. So what we have right here is a graphic that is taken from perkins.org. This is from Perkins School for the Blind. You can find it on www.perkins.org/school/ECC. And of course, ECC stands for the Expanded Core Curriculum. So in the middle is a round gray puzzle piece that says core academics, because again, the idea of expanded core is to support those core academics. That's why it's the expanded core. Around that puzzle piece, we have the 9 areas of the expanded core curriculum. So our first puzzle piece from 12 to 1 in orange is sensory efficiency. From 1 to 2 in gold is assistive technology. At the 3 o'clock position in dark blue is orientation and mobility, which is the subject of today's webinar. From 4 to 5 is in dark pink is social interaction. At 6 o'clock in light green is self-determination. Between 7 and 8 in a brighter pink is independent living. At 9 o'clock in light blue is recreation and leisure. From about 10 to 11 in purple is career education. And then from 11 to 12 in red is compensatory access. So Jake, what do we mean when we talk about orientation and mobility?
Yeah, Jess, and thanks for that introduction and explanation over the expanded core curriculum. And I don't know about you, but over these past, was it 8, 9 weeks now, I've had a just great, fun learning experience with everybody, going over in detail each area of the expanded core curriculum, and just taking this time to increase my knowledge. And viewers, I hope that we've been able to increase your knowledge and give you guys some ideas and activities that you can use at home. Most of the time, Jesse and I really try to focus on making it to where it's affordable, free, and stuff that we can just start doing right now. So thank you. And Jesse, real fast to answer your question, is orientation mobility is where you are now, where do you need to get, where do you need to go, and how do I get there safely? And I think the first thing we're going to dive into is going to be body image. And Jess, give us a brief explanation of what we mean by this.
So I think most of us, when we think of body image, we hear that phrase positive body image. When we're talking about orientation, mobility, a little bit different. Just more, does the child know where the different parts of the bodies are? If I said point to your eyes, can they point to their eyes, their nose, their mouth, their feet, their hands? You know, where is their body in relation to other things? So if I said, where is up in relation to you? They have that, again, just kind of that concept of the different parts of their body and starting to understand where that body is in space. You're muted.
I'm unmuted now. Thanks, Jess, for that. So moving on to our next topic there concerning orientation mobility is orient to the environment around you. Jesse, what do we mean when we're talking about this?
So when we talk about orienting to the environment around you, this is if I'm standing in the door to my bedroom, do I know where the closet is? Where is my bed? Where am I within the space of my environment? How big is the room I'm in? Where are the locations that I need to get to? What is around me that's important that I need to know? And that's sort of what we mean when we talk about orienting to the environment.
Thank you, Jesse, for that. And I think about maybe, and I know we're going to talk more about this later, but using your senses to help you understand where different things are. And I know you're going to dive in deeper to that here in just a while. So next thing would be a white cane. And what is a white cane and why is that important?
White cane is probably the first thing people think of after a guide dog when they think about people with vision loss. So I have a white cane here with me. This is an extension of your body. This functions essentially as your eyes. It really does two things for us. The first thing is that for our students or somebody with vision loss, this identifies them as somebody with vision loss, particularly when you have this red stripe across the bottom. The white cane with the red stripe is an internationally known symbol of vision loss. And a little trivia tidbit for you, the white cane was actually invented by the Peoria Lions Club in Peoria, Illinois. People were using versions of canes before that, obviously, but they invented the white cane with that red stripe. So little trivia for today, but this helps people to know that you're blind or you're visually impaired so that when you are walking down the street, you're getting ready to cross, a driver coming up will realize that you may not be able to see them or you may not realize they're there. Or let's say that you are in a store and the fire alarm goes off. This can help people identify that you may need extra help in safely evacuating the building. So not only it identifies you, but then it can also help you detect things like obstacles and drop-offs in your path. So you're walking down the sidewalk and somebody left a manhole cover open because they're doing work. It can keep you from accidentally falling into that. So it really is an extension of your body.
Thank you for that, Jesse. And 10 points for Hufflepuff for the trivia, tidbit there. And one thing I know we'll probably talk a little bit later too is, are there different types of canes, but not just in relation to the size, but the materials that they're made out of?
Absolutely. So you have graphite or aluminum are the two most common materials. You also have canes with different types of tips. So we have canes that can be used in rural settings if you're having to do a lot of walking on unpaved roads, tips that roll, tips that glide, and your orientation mobility specialist that your child sees will help you determine the right material and type of cane. And then there's also two major types, or really I should say three major types of canes. We have our typical mobility cane like the one that I demonstrated with. We have an identity cane, which is typically a lot thinner, a lot lighter. It's not really meant to detect obstacles. Maybe the person doesn't need that, but it is going to let others know that they have vision loss for those safety concerns we talked about. And then there are support canes for somebody who maybe needs to use what we traditionally think of as a cane, something to lean on. They do have some with the white, with the red stripe, so that it marks that person as somebody with a visual impairment.
Thank you, Jesse. So what I'm getting is different types of canes for different needs and different types of materials, also really for kind of a need-based or preference. So we got options there. So next, I think is we're going to talk a little bit about community travel and the skills that are required to do that. And give us some more feedback on that, Jess.
So community travel is pretty much what it sounds like. If you think about what do kids do in the summer? They run over to their friends' houses and they go play. So how is your student going to safely get to their friend's house? Do they know how to cross the street? Do they know what the address system is to be able to find the house? Do they understand the different types of intersections that they may encounter? So all of that, just being able to move around within their community, whether that's their neighborhood, their school, the business areas in your town, lots of different skills that fall into that.
Thanks, Jess. And I keep hearing you say the word safety a lot, and I know that's something that we stress and orientation mobility specialists do too. And then I heard you talk about street crossings, and in my mind today, a lot of cars are hybrids or use electrical battery powered for uh, their propulsion engine. So like, how is that important, and does that cause any type of stress levels there and to identify when we're going through community travel?
This has become a very, very hot topic in the last few years for the community of people with vision loss, because you're right. Those cars that run, they're either hybrid or they're electric, they don't make a lot of noise. I myself own a hybrid car and the engine is silent when it's running on the battery power. This creates obvious safety concerns for somebody who we're teaching them to rely on their hearing to cross the street. That's why that white cane can be so, so, so important, because it's alerting that driver. It has made crossing more difficult, and that's definitely something to talk about your child's orientation mobility specialist with. And that's one reason some people do choose to get a guide dog versus using a cane, because the guide dog has that advantage of being able to see it, where the cane would not be able to detect something that you can't hear.
Mm. All right, thanks for that, Jess. So that's going to lead us into our next topic, which is public transit. And what do we mean by this?
So if you think about anytime you're going to travel somewhere and you don't drive, what are your options? So this could be rideshare services like Uber or Lyft. It could be what we refer to paratransit, which is sort of like a special taxi for those with disabilities that cannot utilize the regular bus system. It can be a bus, a train, a plane, a streetcar, anything that you don't have to personally own is going to take you from point A to point B.
So when I think about this, and you just listed off a bunch of different options that are available for people, how important is it to have a backup plan just in case, a bus isn't going to make that same route, or an Uber or Lyft isn't going to be there for, an hour and I need to get somewhere in 30 minutes?
It's so important. You know, we have seen cases where a brand new paratransit driver accidentally goes to the wrong address, or they don't see the person out there and they leave. That has happened. Right now, we're dealing with a global pandemic and buses have capped capacity. And so we've heard from people in Kansas City that sometimes the bus passes them by because it already has 12 people on it. And so they can't put more on there for safety. And so if you're trying to rely on that to get to work, you really need to have a backup plan. I used to do hiring for a major company here in Kansas City, and one of the questions we always asked was, do you have reliable transportation? We didn't necessarily need to know what that was, but we were very concerned that our employees were going to reliably show up for work on time every day for their shift. And if we notice a pattern of tardiness or of absenteeism, didn't matter if you were using paratransit and the driver didn't show up. What we cared about was that you were not there for your shift. So it's very important to make sure, and for your own safety, if you're somewhere, you know, let's say you go to the library's getting ready to close, you're not within walking distance of your home, you want to have a way to get home if your first option is not able to make it.
So important, Jess. So important. Thanks for sharing that. So I think we're going to move on to our next slide now. And I think we're going to look a little bit more into body image. And Jesse, what are some different educational fun activities that people can start doing at home right now?
So before we get started, we did have a question in the chat that said, if you're not orientation and mobility specialist, why you're teaching this? And that's a very, very fair question. We as vision professionals do have a background in which we have basic knowledge of activities that we do. Again, this is not meant to teach orientation mobility. You need to consult your child's orientation mobility specialist for that. What we're really focusing on is basic concepts to be aware of and then activities that you can do within the home. These are the same kind of activities I do with my students to reinforce what they are learning with their O&M specialist. So the O&M specialist teaches it, they've taught us the concepts, we're helping to reinforce that. So that is a very fair question. So again, please, please, please consult your child's orientation mobility specialist, especially for those areas that are safety sensitive. So as vision professionals, we have had training that's just not as much as a certified orientation mobility specialist has. So hopefully that answers that question. So first activity, body image, a lot of the activities that we're going to start with are for younger students. Big one is nursery rhymes and songs. These help teach the different parts of your body. So a common one's head, shoulders, knees, and toes. This is a great one because the child's having to touch those areas on their own body. We can see that they know where they are. Ones that any kind of finger play songs. I like Itsy Bitsy Spider, and you know, can you make the spider crawl up my arm? Can you make the spider crawl up your leg? Those kinds of things, again, can help the child to start reinforce those concepts that they're learning about the different parts of their body.
Thank you for that, Jesse, and very good explanation and question, from the audience there. And uh, I think also this helps expand knowledge, for even parents out there that I know are listening. Many of them have just started learning about the expanded core curriculum, and understanding how important it is to help develop the education and skills for their students while they're at home, while they may not be receiving the minutes at school right now because we didn't go back to school on time. So thanks for that and keeping us up. But so moving on with body language, I think we're going to talk about left and right and what that means. I know you talked a little bit about, and then we're going to get into descriptive language.
So this is a concept we hear all the time when people are trying to, when a layperson's trying to give directions, turn to your left, turn to your right. This is a skill that even our students with vision need. So just kind of being able to reinforce, show me your left hand, show me your right hand. This is going to sound silly. I raise guide dog puppies. And so I've made it a habit of, just for myself, saying, I'm turning left. And the puppy isn't learning left and right, but that's reinforcing to me. And it's kind of alerting, just the fact that they're hearing me say something is alerting them to the fact that we're about to make a turn. So just something as simple as verbalizing, oh, we're getting ready to turn left, we're getting ready to turn right. Because that's a hard skill for any kid to learn. I have plenty of friends that still do the put your fingers out in front of you and the one L that faces the right direction, that's the left. So just being able to continually reinforce that skill.
I think you nailed it there, Jesse. And so, what I keep hearing you saying too is reinforce positive behavior over and over again. That builds up confidence and self determination as well to help young people develop the skills necessary. So, tell us a little bit more about descriptive language and how this is beneficial to understanding our body and image on where that's at.
So again, especially for our students with total vision loss, who maybe it's not as easy for them to observe as a student with full vision or even low vision. Um, one thing that I do when I'm working with younger children, and we talked about this in another webinar, is facial expression, saying I'm happy, so my face is relaxed, my mouth is turned up slightly, so that they can start building, because they're going to encounter those descriptions in literature and media, and so being able to connect those descriptions with the parts of their body. I'm reading a book. Junie B. Jones raised her right hand. Oh, can you show me what that looks like? Can you raise your hand? Or using descriptive audio on a movie or a TV, because they're going to be describing what that character is doing. And so we're helping them to constantly build that vocabulary and that knowledge. And it's just, again, that continual reinforcement that our children with vision are getting because they can see it through observation, that we may have to work a little bit harder for our children that have low vision or no vision.
Thank you, Jesse, for that explanation. And, when I'm thinking about that and descriptive language, can audio, descriptive movies or TV shows help to enhance some of these, learning and behavioral traits when we're talking about this?
Absolutely. Again, it's giving them access to, it's giving that child access to all of those nonverbal cues that become very important to a story. And what's great about using that descriptive audio, and I think we talked about this a little bit in a previous webinar as well, is that the studio writes the script, so they know what's important and they time it to the dialogue. But then it also is, again, building that understanding of the vocabulary, and in terms of body image, they're hearing when they talk about a character walking across the room, a character raising their hand, a character making a facial expression. So that just, it helps to give them the language to continually reinforce that.
That's good information, Jess. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, so I think we're going to move on then to more activities, but in relation to the environment. And we're going to start off first maybe with landmarks. Can you, tell me what that is, and clues? What's the difference between both those, and how can those be helpful for someone to understand the environment around them?
Landmarks and clues are just one way that we orient ourselves. We know where we are, and as sighted people, we do this all the time. We just maybe don't use as formal a language for it. So a landmark is something that's not going to move. When I'm driving home, I know that I'm getting ready to turn onto my street because on one corner there's a street light, and then on the other corner there's a house with a unique architectural style. Those are my landmarks, and if they were to leave, like the one time driving into our neighborhood, sign that I normally relied on was down, I'm more likely to miss my turn. And I didn't even realize that I was, why am I missing my turn all of a sudden? Because this landmark that I didn't even realize I was using as a landmark was suddenly not there anymore. A clue is something that is less permanent. So today they were in our activities of daily living apartment, they were making bacon as part of a cooking lesson. And I could smell the bacon as I'm walking down the hall. And of course, the scent got a lot stronger once I was across from there. And so that's my clue that I'm near the apartment. When I can smell that cooking, I know where I am, but I can't rely on that constantly because it's going to depend on whether or not they're cooking. So again, continuing to verbalize for our students, depending on their level of vision. A child with low vision, something that they can see is going to serve as a landmark. For a child with no vision, it might be their favorite store is next to Bath and Body Works. Bath and Body Works has a certain scent to it. So I know when I smell all of those products, I'm near the store I want to go to. Or it could be something their cane encountered. When we put the new bus hub out here, we put a flower planter at the spot where people needed to turn to get to the crosswalk. So they had a landmark that made it easier to find something that was not going to move. So again, a lot of this comes down to verbalizing. So, oh, I smell Bath and Body Works. We must be really close to the store. Or I'm walking by the food court and it's in the middle of the lunch rush and I can hear all of those voices. So that's my clue that we're really close to Macy's or wherever it is that you're going.
And that has to do with sometimes too in time, space on what time of the day it is, maybe helpful indicators to help you mark out landmarks and clues. So I think a little bit of that's going to go into our next bullet point, Jess, and that's going to be mental mapping. What's this all about?
So this is something I see a lot of our O&M specialists work with our clients on, is being able to build that mental map of, for example, when they're new to Alphapointe, what does Alphapointe look like? If you were, as a sighted person, if I closed my eyes and I said, okay, I'm going to picture the layout of my office, and I know when I'm facing the window that my desk is to the right, the light switch is directly to my right. There's windows across the office from me. The bookshelf is on the left. I have built that map that I know where everything is. And so again, helping the student to develop that map. Oh, where is the bookcase that you need to go get your toys from? Can you, if we're playing with blocks, can you create a replica of your room and show me where your toy shelf is or your bed? This is a harder skill. This was one that they may need more help with from an orientation mobility specialist, but if they've been working on that, just asking them to tell you where things are so that they can start thinking about that from that mapping standpoint.
So, like really with anything, repetition and paying attention to those details will help someone develop a better mental map of a situation. And, I know through our college prep program, Jesse, the O&M specialists, they go up to college and run the schedule, before the classrooms and the hallways are filled so that the student will have a better understanding so they can map that, right? And then when school does start, the classrooms are filled and hallways are busy and everybody's moving. The student doesn't have to then, deal with that situation for the first time during maybe a more stressful situation going on. So, thanks for elaborating on that. And we are just moving right along. I think the next thing is your favorite, which is compass directions.
Jake, we're laughing because I told him when we were prepping for the webinar, this is the thing I'm the worst in. I get my running joke when I'm with my clients is there's a reason I'm not an O&M. I get turned around very easily. And so compass directions are used a lot by our orientation mobility specialists. We see this very often as goals on IEPs as students get older. And so knowing north, south, east, west, something simple to start with is there are some board games that deal with maps. There's a game from APH called Trex that I have seen our O&M specialists use with clients from younger children all the way up to adults to kind of work on that. For myself at work to figure out where I'm facing, I always have to parallel myself to the highway and say, okay, we're right by 71 highway. It runs north-south. So now I have an idea of what corner of the building this is if somebody's asking me to give it to them by compass directions. And again, saying things like, oh, we're headed west, I'm getting ready to turn right, so we're going north. Or if your child has been working on compass directions, ask them, if we're headed west and we turn right, which direction are we headed now? So again, that's where you have to kind of know what your child has already been working on, but just the more that we can do to reinforce that, because that's a skill that they'll be using through adulthood, and if you have a compass app on your phone that talks, that can be just another great way just to even build the language so they have that concept of north, south, east, west, and then those intermediate directions like northeast, southeast, for example.
Thanks for teeing that up for us, Jess. I know that's your favorite subject. So we're going to move on, and next is going to be white canes and activities that we can do and understanding of why that's important. So what's going on first? What's our first bullet point here?
So the first one is we need to use the white cane. So sometimes what happens is the students use the cane at school, they put it against the wall when they get home because they're very familiar with everywhere they're going, or they're not going anywhere without their family because they're that age where mom and dad is always with them, and then they don't use it. So the more practice they can get with it, the better their white cane skills are going to be and the quicker they're going to learn it. So the very first thing is just to encourage your child to use it. Maybe not necessarily within the house if they're comfortable with the house, but if we're going out, we're going to Target, hey, let's make sure that we grab your cane, or you're going to go play with your friends, make sure you grab your cane. And that can be hard depending on the age, because some of our students don't see especially our students with low vision, don't always see the purpose to it, or they don't want to look different from their friends. And so just encouraging that use as much as possible.
And you talked a little bit about this earlier, Jess, is it's a great identifier, when you're out in the community, especially for some individuals that may have more functioning sight left. And like you said, children don't want to be seen as different. They'll, leave it, or what do all kids do? They pick stuff up and they leave it here or there. But it's a great way just to identify, with what's going on, and let other people know that you may have some vision issues, and you may need a little bit more time to do those, and navigate the environment around you. So coming in next is a stay in step. What
So when we talk about staying in step, when I step to so typical cane skills, and again, your child, depending on your child's abilities or additional disabilities, there may be modifications to this. Please consult your child's O&M specialist. But your typical cane skills, I step right, my cane is sweeping to the left. I step left, my cane is sweeping to the right. And I move it in time with my step, because the idea is that if the cane encounters an obstacle, I should have enough time to stop before I encounter the obstacle. Otherwise, my cane is not doing me any good. This can be a really hard skill. Again, this skill can also be tied to age and developmental level. So kind of consult with your child's O&M about where they are with this skill. Sometimes for beginning cane users, especially very little kids, they may not be as worried about that as just having the cane and having it in front of them versus trailing along behind them. But just kind of reminding, if your child is working on that skill, reminding them, oh, let's get back into step.
are you going to do a demonstration for us, or maybe give us an
We
idea?
discovered that with as close as the computer has to be to the green screen, we weren't able to make that work quite so
Okay,
well.
okay.
But
All right, then let's move on. Sweeping patterns. What do we mean by this, and why is this important when we're talking about white cane skills?
So this goes back to staying in step. That back and forth movement is called sweeping. Um, Again, depending on the age and skill level of your child, encouraging them to continue to move that cane back and forth. Sometimes what we see is that they're not doing wide enough. They're just doing a little tiny bit in front of them, and they're not going the whole like shoulder to shoulder or even a little bit beyond. So they're missing things that are on the side, especially the peripheral vision loss. This makes it more likely that they're going to walk into something. Um, I know one orientation mobility specialist I've worked with, we had talked about that for some of our older students who should have these skills, we said, okay, we believe in natural consequences. We're not going to let them enter into an unsafe situation, but if they're going to, let's say, there's a bean bag and they're going to accidentally run into it, it's not going to hurt them, and then it's, oh, should have swept that cane. But again, please consult your child's O&M specialist. Cannot say that enough. But just making sure that they're able to detect objects in their path by sweeping wide enough. And this is one that's really easy. As the day goes on, you're walking a long time, you get tired, it's easy to start getting a narrow and narrower arc. Or the thing I often see with our adults who are new to cane skills is oftentimes they don't quite sweep wide enough on the hand that they're holding the cane, just because it's not a natural motion. It takes work.
So practice, and thanks for elaborating on that. So one thing that kind of brings to my head, though, on your sweeping patterns and canes in generals is, as we grow and develop, we get bigger and bigger. We get bigger feet, we get bigger shoe sizes. How important is it, Jesse, to make sure that we have the right cane length?
So it is. Again, if you're using the cane as a mobility cane, so it's not just to identify you, but it's actually to detect drop-offs and obstacles in your path, you want it long enough that from the time the cane encounters an obstacle, you have time to stop and make sure that you're safe. So as your child grows, they're probably going to need to get different cane lengths. You hear different rules of thumb depending on uh, depending on how fast a child walks, and there's also different schools of thought. I've heard everything from the armpit to the collarbone, to some organizations prefer even higher than that. So there's a preference in there. So as your child grows, their orientation mobility specialist will probably start recommending that they get taller canes to make sure that it's continuing to provide that safety benefit for them. And if you're not sure what size of cane your child needs, their orientation mobility specialist should be able to guide you in that if you are concerned they've maybe outgrown the cane since the last time they were seen by their O&M.
So you just talked about this in this last little topic, and you mentioned is stopping when we encounter obstacles. Why is that important?
So that's probably where some of the biggest safety stuff comes in. A story I heard when I was attending a conference, and we had a guide dog user speaking, and he was talking about the importance of stopping when your guide dog stops. That he was disoriented. He didn't realize he was disoriented. He thought he knew where he was, and there was about a 3 or 4 foot drop off in a parking garage. It was concrete. The dog stopped, and he thought the dog was mistaken. And he kept trying to tell the dog forward, and the dog, no, 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 I don't know what you're doing. So he stepped forward and he fell. And he released the harness, and he said, I could just feel the dog looking at me like, well, I told you to stop. So being able to, and that was his story of why you had to trust the dog. In this case, why you need to trust your cane, because we want to make sure that you're safe, that you're not accidentally stepping off a curb, that there's construction going on and they've torn up the sidewalk that is normally flat. And so needing to be able to stop when your cane encounters those obstacles. And sometimes our kids get really excited and they start running or they start walking really fast, and the cane encounters an obstacle and they keep going. And again, this can be a skill that's developmental. So consult with your child's orientation and mobility specialist about how much about what the child should be doing, how that particular child's cane skills should look. But the cane touched it, so we need to stop and figure out what it is so that we know what we need to do.
I'm thinking, Jess, we might have been better off just putting consult with your orientation mobility specialist on each slide. But all right, thanks for that. Hey, we're moving on. So next, we're going to talk a little bit about community travel. And first up on that is going to be addresses and systems. And why is this important to understand, Jess, and how can this help us?
You, So I can remember having to learn this in school as somebody with vision, the idea that your odd numbers are on the right, your even numbers are on the left, and when you get to a new block, the addresses are going to jump up. So you might go from like a 2400 number to a 2500 number. So when they're going to go visit their friends, now of course, I'm a dinosaur. I grew up before GPS. Don't give me that look, Jake. I can see him going, dinosaur, what? A lot of us grew up before GPS, where you had to have a better understanding of the address system, because my phone did not just happily bring me right there and deliver me to the doorstep. So we had to figure out, if I'm leaving my house on the 100 block and my friend is on the 300 block and I'm an odd number and they're an even number, how am I going to get there? We still want to have those skills, even though we have the GPS, because GPS isn't always right or doesn't always work. And so again, just kind of talking about, we just crossed the street. So now instead of the 2400 block, we're on the 2500 block. Or you need to go to so-and-so's house. Their house is 2 and our house is 1. Which side of the street is it on? Do we have to cross the street? So just sort of reinforcing that.
No, Jess, you brought up some really good points there, because we talked about this earlier. Backup plan. What if your phone dies and you can't rely on that cell phone anymore, or maybe you don't have signal or internet access? Having a good foundation of all these skills, and then use technology as a tool to build upon those. But without a good understanding first, it's really hard to kind of move on to that next level and be confident. All right, well, Jesse said the next one's up here, so we got curbs and drop-offs. Why is that important, Jess, to understand when dealing with orientation mobility?
So just again, using that language that, we're getting near the curb or the drop off, the cane encountered it, so that because that's probably some of where we see a lot of danger is, stepping off the curb accidentally, or knowing that when we get to those bumps on the sidewalk, in our professional term, we call those truncated domes, that means I'm about to enter the street. So they have that awareness. They're playing with their friends, and they know that if I step off that curb, I could be in the path of a car. and having that awareness that it's there. Uh, so that they don't trip over it, that they don't get into the path of an incoming vehicle. And this is something, again, that their orientation mobility specialist will be working with them on. So a lot of times when I'm working with a young student, if we're on a field trip and we're walking, what I'm doing is just, oh, do you feel the curb on the left with your cane? It kind of went down a little bit, or, oh, we're on the bumps. That means that we're at the end of the curb, we're about to cross, or, oh, the cane went down, there's a drop off here, and just using that language to reinforce. I'm not always expecting them to find it if that's not a skill they're working on, because again, I want to make sure they're safe, but I'm using the language to continue to build those concepts so that they're familiar with them.
So concept development and repetition is, safety is your other fun word, through all these webinars with this is something we just have to keep doing over and over again. So parallel versus perpendicular, and why is that important, Jess?
So for a lot of people that are navigating, we do teach to cross the street when you have parallel traffic that is going the same direction you are versus perpendicular. Those are terms that they're going to hear from their orientation mobility specialists. So, oh, the car is going the same direction to us. It's traveling parallel to us. Or we're at the stoplight. Oh, I can hear all of these cars that are going in front of us. They're perpendicular to us. Just again, giving them that vocabulary that they're going to hear when they get older, so that it's familiar to them and kind of reinforces those concepts. And hey, bonus math lesson, because they're also going to be working on these concepts in geometry too.
Nobody likes a bonus math question, Jesse, but crosswalks and signals, we touched a little bit about this earlier, but Jess, why is this important to understand when we're talking about cane navigation and being safe?
So when they get older, their O&Ms are going to start working with them on safe street crossing and identifying how they know when they're in a crosswalk, or at a traffic signal, how they know when it's safe to cross. And so something simple, if you're in Kansas City or an area with what we call the audio pedestrian signals, they're the signals that beep. Just, oh, I can hear the signal and I know that that means I have to wait, or it just said walk sign is on to cross 45th Street. I know it's safe to cross. And some of them even vibrate for people who are deaf blind. And that can be just a fun thing to, the kids find those really fascinating. So, oh, put your hand on that. Let's see if it vibrates. Again, I'm not expecting the child to be the one to initiate the street crossing. That's unless unless the orientation and mobility specialist has told me that they are completely independent in that area. But I'm just kind of reinforcing that language they're going to hear and that awareness of the environment around them versus just taking their hand and crossing the street without stopping and saying, oh, I know it's safe to cross because I heard it say walk sign is on and I verified that there's no traffic that's still crossing the intersection.
Again, safety is most important, and understanding those skills to be independent to do those types of things. So thanks, Jess, for sharing that. And we're going to move on to, I think, our last slide, really, over orientation, mobility, and cane skills is going to be public transit. And first and foremost is, planning that route. And Jess, why is this something that we need to learn how to do and think of ahead of time?
So this is the idea of, again, how am I going to get where I'm going? If I'm using a bus system or I'm using like a subway system, do I know what time the trains come or the bus comes? Where are the stops? Am I going to have to transfer? How am I going to get from point A to point B? And so if you're going somewhere that you're having to use that, are you using a mapping service on your phone? Are you going to a website such as Google Maps or like the Kansas City Area Transportation Authority website? So again, verbalizing how you're figuring out where you need to go, what buses you need to take, what subway stops you're going to, all those different things that you have to think about when you're using public transit.
There's a lot of variables there to consider, and even we've said this before, is having a backup plan. Life happens, and there will be problems. So being able to use those critical thinking skills to come up with the solution is going to be important. So rideshare, what does this mean? And I know it has different names in different cities. So elaborate a little bit on that for us, Jesse.
So you might be using a service like Uber or Lyft. so somebody's coming to pick you up in their vehicle. And so this is where, if you're getting ready to travel and your child, if they are older and maybe they know how to use the accessibility features on the phone, your family's getting ready to go somewhere, can they be the one to get on the phone and actually schedule it? You know, if you have to have special instructions. So if we have somebody here at Alphapointe who's using, let's say, Uber, we might say, come pick up at the Circle Drive. Please verbally identify yourself. We may put that in there so that they know that they're, teaching them that the app is going to tell you who's picking you up. What does their car look like? So they can ask those questions if they can't see it for safety. But just getting them used to thinking about those services. And if they're doing paratransit, so as they get older, their orientation mobility specialist will probably work with them on this as part of their IEP goals. But what are those? Paratransit is typically it's like a taxi service, but it's within a certain radius of a fixed route bus. To qualify for it, it can be no more than a certain percentage over what is charged for that bus route. So in Kansas City, that's normally $3 per trip each way. And so knowing that service is out there, how do I schedule it? For example, normally it's 24 hours in advance. Right now it's 48 hours in advance due to COVID-19. But just getting the child used to thinking of those as transportation options.
Yeah. And Jesse, is that a program that a person would have to apply for, or can I just call, Sheriff Fair and say, hey, can you pick me up, if I'm 48 hours in advance?
You do have to apply for it. So they have to verify that your residence is within the radius, that you do have a disability that prevents you from using the bus. So it's not designed to be more convenient than the bus. It's designed that, let's say you live in a neighborhood that does not have sidewalks. And so your concern is not safe for you to walk to the nearest bus stop because there's no sidewalks, or you have to cross a major intersection that doesn't have a light or a crosswalk. So there's some reason that you can't use the fixed bus route. That's the idea behind paratransit. So if you're not sure, your child's orientation mobility specialist can quit laughing at me, Jake. I have to put that in there.
I should have counted how many times you say consult your orientation. No, it is important, and that's
Yes.
why Jesse keeps saying that. But you're just funny. All right,
Okay.
continue. I'm sorry. Well, the next one is bus systems, and how is this going to help out, and why is it important to understand all the routes, what buses go where, and a big one
Yeah, so there's different types of bus routes. You have, the bus is convenient in a lot of ways. It runs on a fixed schedule. I don't know. Are you here? Because I'm going to be on video next to you.
Hello, guys. I think we're having a little bit of oh, there we go.
Hi, Jake. Oh, 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 oh. Where
Who's this?
did it go? Oh, no. Is it you or is it me? Okay.
Go back over there.
I think I'm still on. If you can hear us, can you say something in the chat, please? Okay, we got a yes. So that might have been Jake's computer. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that small hiccup. So Jake was talking about bus systems and why is that advantageous. One of the nice things about a bus is that it runs at a specific time. You don't have to have a reservation like you might have to if you're using a paratransit service. So being able to, again, take the bus. If you have somewhere you're going that is convenient to a bus route, just getting used to thinking of that as another option. Nice thing about buses in Kansas City is that if you qualify for paratransit, they're free, which makes that, um, which makes it a nice option. You don't have to pay anything for it if you have your paratransit card. And so that's kind of a nice little perk we have here in Kansas City, and another incentive to learn how to use the bus. And it can serve again as that backup if you were planning to take Uber or Lyft, but there's no drivers near you and you didn't have a share fare reservation. This gives you another option for how to get home.
I'm back. Sorry about that, guys. I'm here.
Hold on, I accidentally
One
Okay.
more option that we have here in Kansas City is a lot of our colleges actually partner with, the transit system and offer free bus fare too for those in college students. So that's great. And our last one here, and it's not going to pertain to all the cities, everywhere, but we have a streetcar system. And how can people use that, Jess?
So the streetcar system goes along the really popular areas in Kansas City, and this is free to everybody, not just if you have that paratransit pass. So if your child does not qualify for paratransit, doesn't have that pass yet, but you want to practice using some kind of public transit, the streetcar is a really fun way to do that, and it's not going to cost you anything, and it'll take you between like the River City Market area, Power and Light kind of downtown area. So it's a lot of people just ride it for fun, honestly, but it's a great way to explore Kansas City and kind of start getting that idea of there's a specific stop that you have to get on and off at and that kind of thing.
And I think even here in Kansas City, they are going to be pushing forward with expanding the routes for that streetcar, which is awesome. We've really seen that kind of explode here, in the past 3, 4 years. So it's been a great resource for a lot of people.
And it's just fun.
Yeah.
Let's be honest, it's just fun. So Alphapointe can help. We do have our expanding youth experiences. That those are Jake. Those are your programs. So why don't you talk
Yeah,
about?
so the I program, clever enough, expanding youth experiences. We typically, we're not doing them right now. We will open them back up hopefully within the next month. We are following all ACD or AC CDC protocols, social distancing, everything else. So those are monthly gatherings and activities that we typically do out in the community, and we try to mix them up quite a bit. We've gone to the movies, rock climbing. We went snowboard and skiing this winter, Royals games. So it's just a way that we can kind of focus on community engagement. Peers can socialize with one another, and we focus on the ECC, and we don't hit every one of the 9 topic areas, but we definitely hit recreation and leisure every time. That's for sure. What's up
Yeah.
next, Jess?
Well, and just a quick note that, we do address orientation and mobility in those. The kids are using their canes. We often have O&M specialists that join us for those that can help reinforce, and they're getting to see what their peers are doing as well. So next one is our student transition employment program. And you and I have had lots of orientation mobility talks about this one, haven't we?
Yeah, it's always ongoing because the environment's always changing. So student transition employment. This is where we're focusing on job readiness skills, exploration, and advocacy. But essentially, it is a 8-week work-based learning program for students that are in transition, and it helps them develop and understand, the key components of employment. How does that look? What is good work behavior? Showing up on time, time management. It's a great program. We offer this all year round. You can find out more information on our website about that, or contact us if you would like to know more information.
And of course, the important part of that is getting to work, which ties
Yeah,
directly into the topic of today as well.
yeah, 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 yeah.
And then we do have, if you want to briefly touch on our summer camps,
Yeah,
particularly the July one, which I think is the one that applies most to orientation and mobility.
absolutely, and that's where one, Jesse, too, when you're talking about O&M, is I see a lot of rollerball tips out there. That's because the environment changes. There's hills, so it's easy for those rollerballs to move up and down and over bigger obstacles. But yeah, typically we have a day camp for younger kids and an overnight camp for the older kids. This year we're going to be combining those, and we're looking at July 13th through the 17th of offering those camps. You can find more information on our website, or send Jesse or I an email, and we'd be happy to answer any of the questions that you have. Parent Connect. This is a closed Facebook group for parents and vision professionals to share resources or talk about issues that they're having and problem solve. So again, it's a closed Facebook group that you have to be, accepted, or, send out an invitation whenever you do join. But I put all the registration for events that we're having, for camps, for programming, and just a great overall resource.
So before we move into questions, we do want to say thank you for joining us today. Our mission at Alphapointe is to empower those with vision loss to achieve their dreams and aspirations. If you want to help us continue creating great content like this, you can donate at www.alphapointe.org. There is an E on the end of Alphapointe. If you have vision loss or someone you know has vision loss and you think they would benefit from our services, please give us a call, 816-421-5848, or you can go to alphapointe.org. So at this time, we'll open it up to questions. You can use the chat box or the question and answer. I do know we have one question from Andrea that says, what are changes to the bus and streetcar systems operating in COVID safety measures? So these are sort of ever evolving. So the most up-to-date information will be on the KCATA website, but the last update I read was Sheriff Fare. If you use that paratransit service, has to be scheduled 48 hours in advance instead of 24, and they are limiting ride capacity to 200 total trips in the overall system per day. So it's kind of a first come, first serve basis, means you're gonna have to plan a little bit further ahead. We do know that some routes have been reduced. This has affected people who work for us. We've had people say that they've had a harder time. We've worked with our employees to make sure that they have a way to get to and from work because buses are running on a less frequent schedule, or if they're full, they may pass somebody by because they aren't allowed to have more people on. They're changing how they are loading, so people without disabilities are loading in the back door, for example. But Jake has put a link in the chat on the KC streetcar and what they're doing for COVID. And so just you can always check out their website for the bulletin, but it has created additional challenges for transportation. And Barb, who's our orientation mobility specialist here at Alphapointe, says check your specific route on ridekc.org. They may have had time chains and some have been discontinued. Oh, Jake, I think you sent it to all panelists, so I'm going to send that to everyone. Thank you for telling us that. Okay, so that should be in your chat box now to all panelists and attendees. There was another question, a very good one from Mary, that said, where did you get the data to support that 80% of learning is through vision? As I recall, this was simply a comment that someone made years and years ago, but was never supported through data. So I'll be honest, in all the training I've done as a vision professional, that is a stat that gets thrown out all the time that we all have memorized. And I've even heard people use statistics greater than 80%. Jake, you replied that that you got that information from the American Optometric Association, that up to 80% of a child's learning in school is through vision. So that's a little bit of a distinction from how we normally hear that stat. That's a really great question. And I'm going to see if I can find the exact source, because it's just, I think, one of those stats that as vision professionals we take for granted because we hear it all the time. So I'm glad that you're asking. I'm going to have to go find the exact source for that because it's been a while since I've looked at it specifically. So thank you for asking that question. And again, if there's any other questions, we would be happy to answer them. We will have an Infopointe webinar next week, and we'll be sending out that information as soon as we get it shored up. Can you share resources for learning helpful technology as a low vision adult? So that's a great question. We are going to be doing our next series. This is our last of our expanded core curriculum series. Next week, we are planning to have some guest panelists, and so we'll be sending that out information once we get everything confirmed. After that, we're actually our very next webinar on, Jake, what's that date? June, 2 Thursdays from now.
Yeah, so we're
June
trying to
18th.
we're sticking with Thursdays, you guys, at 8 o'clock for these webinars as we push.
I'm not up that early, Jake. 8 o'clock?
Oh, 2 p.m. Sorry, no, 2 p.m. And that's Central Time. We get a lot of questions about time zones, which is fair enough. And we started putting all that into our descriptions to let you guys know what time it is. But after this webinar is over, during the registration process, if you indicated that you would be up to taking a survey, that'll be sent to you. So after looking at all the survey results, Jesse and I and the rest of the team members here, constantly assistive technology is at top of the chart as far as what do we want to learn next. So listeners and web attendees, you guys actually control what we teach. So fill out those surveys.
And
Yes.
just want to say that we are having one coming up based on those surveys. So the June
Yep.
18th, I was looking up the date, June 18th is going to be wearable technology. We had an assistive technology webinar last week. Now, again, that was focused on students, but a lot of that information is applicable to adults too. That is on our
Yeah.
YouTube channel. All previous webinars that we had recordings for have been uploaded. And then we're going to do our next series, which will start
Yep.
June 18th, will be on wearables. We're going to do the June 18th will be on low vision magnification devices. And then
Mm-hmm.
the next Thursday will be on devices that are geared more toward total vision loss and audio output.
And you guys, once you register, you will be notified of upcoming webinars for the future. So you'll have that information in advance. We try to do it release on.
Oh, hold on. I tried to mute myself and I muted you. I missed. I'm sorry, Jake.
It's okay. Webinar information and registration goes out on Mondays typically, and then it'll also be available to register through our different social media platforms. And then on Wednesday is a email sent out from me personally on registration. So we try to hit you on as many different platforms as possible for 3 days in a row, all the way up to 2 p.m., not 8 a.m. on Thursdays.
Well, we do want to thank everybody for participating. There were some really great questions in this
Mm-hmm.
webinar, and I think that, the one about, since we are not certified orientation mobility
Yep.
specialists, that was a wonderful question. We want to thank you for asking that. And again, to reiterate one last time for your
No.
change jar, whatever you're doing, Jay, with this topic in particular, please make sure that you're consulting your child's orientation mobility specialist. We want to reinforce the concepts, but we also want to make sure our kids are safe. So thank you to everybody, and we
Yep.
will see you next week for our next Infopointe webinar. You have a great day.
Yeah, have a good weekend, guys. We'll see you next week.